Well, very quickly to start off, I'm John O'Reilly. I run a health and safety consultancy and training facility. Today's talk is about the independent task force review, first review of health and safety legislation in 20 years. Bit of background, the reason the report was commissioned, New Zealand has actually got, hello, welcome. New Zealand has actually got the worst fatality rates in the developed world. We also have the least prescriptive legislation in the developed world. So that's what I'm talking about today, to try and give you a flavour of what these potential changes will mean to SMEs in New Zealand. So that's the act that we're under at the moment. As I said, first time in 20 years. How the review was conducted, and I'm not going to talk verbatim about all of these slides, but some of them I do have to touch on. It was an independent report. They had a main panel of 6 people actually sat down together and actually produced the report. The chair of the meeting, or the task force, was a guy called Rod Yeager, who's actually with Shell Todd. One of the other guys in the panel was a guy called Mike Cosman, who used to actually be in charge of the Department of Labour in New Zealand. So they've had some really good people on there. There was a call for submissions. I believe they received about 460 submissions from different companies and individuals and associations around the country. They also held quite a few public meetings and a number of closed meetings. I was at one of the closed meetings held down in South Auckland. There was about 120 people in the room, all of whom were safety managers or safety professionals of some type. And it was at that meeting there we actually had a slide put on the wall for us to look at that showed the fatal rates from Australia, England, some of the countries in the Netherlands, and in that part of Europe, and New Zealand. And what we saw, unfortunately, is New Zealand was up here, the Netherlands were somewhere down in the middle, heading right down low was the Australians, and the lowest fatal rates in the developed world were from England. Now, England, for those that weren't aware, is the home of health and safety legislation. Goes back to the 1800s with the Apprentice Day Act. And that was as much about moral issues for the apprentices as it was about their safety. The report only went through to the Minister on the 30th of April. So this is all very, very new and very, very fresh. The government's responses won't be coming out until sometime around about the 20th of July. Reason for the delay? The executive report on its own is 30 pages. The main report behind that, another 152 pages. And I think it's it says there 528 pages for the supporting paperwork behind that. And that's without actually looking at the 400 odd submissions that were put in, and each submission was about 16 pages long. So you can imagine what they've got to go through. And it is not being taken lightly with what they're trying to do. So what could these changes mean? Well, the very first thing, as it mentioned on there, a new ministry is being formed already. They're enacting the legislation that's needed to empower that ministry at the moment, and that should be through by about July. And the new ministry should be up and running before Christmas. Now, I'm an import. I put my hands up to that, and you may have actually noticed it from the accent. The 10 years I've been in New Zealand, I've seen a lot of changes. And when I first got here, everyone kept talking to me about OSH, and how OSH was actually quite good. It actually had some teeth. Then the government watered it down and put OSH inside the Department of Labour. And during that period, they took away the warrant cards from the specialist inspectors and gave them all general purpose. So if you called an inspector out to try and help you, there was no guarantee anymore that that inspector knew your type of work environment. And it caused a lot of issues. Then they watered it down again by putting it into the new super ministry, NBIE. Well, they've realised the errors, and this has come out of this report and the Pike River report, that they're now going back to a standalone ministry. And I'm picking it's going to be ended up being MOSH, Ministry of Occupational Safety and Health. Nothing to do with mosh pits. They won't be jumping all over the place. There again, they might. Yeah, safety is a boring, dull subject for a lot of people, so you will find I will try and throw in a couple of crazy comments occasionally. It keeps me alive as well. But there is also a call, and this is going to be a major one. They're talking about dropping our current legislation. Now, one of the things I've found in my 10 and a half years in New Zealand is a lot of people think our prescription, our legislation is too prescriptive as it is. Yet we have the least prescriptive legislation in the developed world. The proposal at the moment is to drop our non-prescriptive legislation and adopt the Australian model. And if people in the room now think what we've got now is prescriptive and hard going, you should have a look at the Australian model. It is a lot harder. Now, for my sins, since I've been in New Zealand, I've also been the National Safety Manager with Leighton Contractors over here. Leighton's are a very large company in Australia, but relatively small here. So I had to learn the Australian systems to then try and Kiwiise them over here. And they are chalk and cheese. Massive, massive differences. Right, so does anyone in the room actually deal with either central government or local government? At least one. One of the big drivers they're talking about in this new regime is they want the government and local governments to really tighten up on their procurement. So they will be looking at the types of companies that are working or hoping to be working for them, to review their safety records and to review their current safety policies and procedures. And if you don't meet the standards that they're going to be wanting, you won't be getting any work. Now, again, this is hypothetical. We don't know exactly where it's going to go yet. There is talk that this may go to a twin envelope tendering system. So the first envelope they open is all the non-price attributes that include safety. And if you can't demonstrate you're up to the mark, they don't even look at the second envelope. So that means in future that just putting in the cheapest price doesn't guarantee you the work. They've got to take that safety on board and treat it seriously. The benefits as well, they're talking about helping with rewards for companies. Now, ACC, under various programs at the moment, will give you the opportunity to get a reduction on your levy. One of the things they've been working on recently is a double-edged version of that. So a company that has been costing ACC a lot of money, instead of getting a discount, could actually have their levies jacked up by up to 50%. At the same time, if you can demonstrate a good record in health and safety and you haven't been costing ACC money, you could end up claiming up to a 50% rebate against your levy. Now, for larger companies in construction in particular, they have what they call the WSMP program, whereby you can save up to 20% of your levies. So if you're at that tertiary level and saving that, and you have a really good safety model and you haven't been costing the money, you could have got the 20% and then 50% off of the 80%, so you're only paying 40% of your levy. So there is some benefits coming out of this as well. But like I say, they are looking at increasing the levies. They're also talking about increasing the fines. And they're talking about a single one-off fine under current legislation, I think is a maximum of about 400,000. They want to stick 100,000 on top of that. And under corporate manslaughter, which they're talking about bringing in, you could be looking under a fatal accident at quite a long custodial sentence. So managers, directors, that's aimed at you. And this is something that the corporate manslaughter, I believe, will definitely happen here. Don't expect it to happen overnight. I'm picking we're 5 years out, maybe longer, but it's coming. We already have Section 56 of the Act, which also allows heavy penalties to be levied against directors as well. One of the funny things is you need to be aware of, if any of you use contractors to do any work, you are liable for the safety of your contractors. Just because you've brought in the so-called experts, you still need to take some steps to ensure they're doing the right things. And if you want to talk to me outside of here on the stand about that, I'll give you more information on that one. Because contractors cause more companies to go into court than any of their own employees ever will. Comprehensive embedding workplace health and safety and education training systems. They're talking about here, what they want is the NZQA unit standard framework from levels 1 to 6. All training should have a health and safety component. There is even talk out there that it may be a requirement in future to own and run a business to actually have a level of knowledge of health and safety because of the liabilities that you run the risk of actually falling foul of. Safety is something, or the training side of safety is something that is really going to be coming at you in the future. Regardless of that change in legislation, if it happens or not, the training side of it is something that is going to be pushed heavily. At the moment, we've got confusing regulations out there. You've got the Health, Safety and Employment Act. You've got another act that deals with chemicals. You've got acts that deal with health, with HR side of things, and they need tidying up as well to actually bring together to get some cohesion, because there's a number of overlaps in some of these that actually run contra to each other. It's a minefield. At the moment, we have a very, very weak regulator. With the new ministry coming on, all the inspectors, to use the normal New Zealand name for them, have all had to reapply to get their own jobs. But those inspectors, as they go into the new ministry, are all going to be going through a lot more training to actually upskill them. Poor worker engagement. Many of you in the room know when you have to actually have a health and safety committee in your company. How many employees do you think you need? 30. By law, at 30 you have to. But now the bad news, for the smaller guys who have less than 30, if you have 5 or more, and just one person says, I want a health and safety committee, by law you've got to have one. It's amazing what we pick up in our industry and that we have to do for this. Inadequate leadership. What they're getting at here is the lack of knowledge and capability within a lot of companies at senior level to understand the safety and the implications. And that comes into the capacity and capability shortcomings there as well. And of course, the great one at the bottom. Another way of saying that, she'll be right. It is the catch-all phrase over here. And of course, if she's not all right, we'll fix it with a bit of number 8 wire. That mentality may have been great in a young, early pioneering country. We've developed, we've moved on. And we've got to actually start thinking about ourselves as well as our employees. One of the other things I've been involved in the past is asset management. And the most valuable asset any company has is its employees. And we need to actually be taking that in mind and reminding the employees of that. So, particular challenges. SMEs, by their very nature, we're generally fairly informal. And a lot of our protocols are therefore not in place properly on safety. The report, when you actually read it, is quite damning at how little most companies actually do, or the lack of systems they have in place to maintain safety properly. The vast majority of companies out there, if ACC were to try and audit them, would barely make it onto their primary, their bottom level. Going up that tree to the secondary level, let alone tertiary, very, very few companies on the SME size actually manage to make that type of grade. And they're really going to be pushing to deal with that. Right. SMEs, it says, has easy access to useful information. We don't. That's the silly thing about it. Even if you look at our regulators, our inspectors out there, when they were set up, what they were supposed to be doing was not just coming out as policemen to have a go at us. They were supposed to come out and visit workplaces on a semi-regular basis and say, what's happening, what help do you need? But they've watered it down so much, they don't have the manpower to do it. Some of them don't have the knowledge to do it. I can tell you in this area, there's been some promotions recently for the new ministry, and it scares the life out of me. One of the guys they got there now as a manager to oversee investigations. He's never actually undertaken a complete investigation himself, and he's now managing the department. So I'm really worried about what access we'll have. There is another, I guess it goes on to this on this slide. They're talking about using other bodies to help with that. One of the ones they put in there is accountants. I know my accountant, he's a great guy. I went in to see him once when he had some builders in doing alterations there. I nearly had a heart attack. He hasn't got the first clue about health and safety. But why would he? He's an accountant. You know, and we don't know what we don't know, and we need to have specialist knowledge in specialist areas. Now they're talking here as well about other industry associations, etc. For my sins, I'm also a member of the New Zealand Safety Council. I actually sit on the board of that organisation. We have a registered safety practitioner scheme. I'm one of about 30 under theirs that's in New Zealand. On the other side of us, we have another organisation called the New Zealand Institute of Safety Management. They have their own scheme for RSPs, but the good news about these two organisations is they both recently come together, and there's now a memorandum of understanding where we're actually working jointly now on a registered scheme for safety professionals. First time this is really, well, it is the first time this has happened in New Zealand, that we've got the two bodies working properly together. Now I know the president of the institute, he and I are good friends. I know the current CEO of the council obviously very well. And getting the two bodies to come together and talk has not been an easy task. But the fact that it's happened, I think, is really good news for New Zealand. It means we're going to see a stronger body of people that have stepped up to the mark, have been adjudicated by their peers to prove their training and their workplace practices to actually be able to offer proper health and safety advice in New Zealand. At the moment, I won't mention names, but there is one construction company where the safety manager there, a lovely woman, has no formal training in health and safety and cannot understand why on earth she would need it. She thinks that what she's learned by going out in the field is enough. Well, that is a very, very important element of what we do. But unless you have the other side of it, you understand the formalities behind it, the law behind it properly, and you don't get taught that out in the middle of a construction site. It needs the two things to come together. So both of those bodies will be key, I think, going forward as well. There are other organisations out there as well that are worth talking to, EMA, Chamber of Commerce, they can also help. But they are not safety specialists. The Institute and the Council, purely about safety.
Excuse me, an interruption, your microphone gauge of the batteries are coming.
Oh, right. Do you want me to stop for a couple of seconds?
No, it's okay, I've got the other one.
Okay, fine.
Excuse me.
So I'm listening.
Your jacket. Enjoy the rest of the show out there.
Thank you.
Yes.
We know that the ACC requirements relate directly to 4801.
Yes.
Are the proposed regulations that comply with 18001? Are there any correlation?
Not 100% sure yet. Unfortunately, is all I can tell you on that one. The Australian model certainly does look at the ISO standards. Thank you. So I would hope they're going to sort of address the standards pretty much full on as well. But at this stage, until this develops further, I can't give you a definitive answer. Sorry about that. But stay in touch with me after as well, by all means. And as soon as we get more information, I'm happy to broadcast it. I do run a free e-newsletter, and these sorts of things will be featured in there to help keep people abreast of it. So you can just register on the stand for that newsletter if you want it. Right. We've touched on this already to some extent, about directors and owners of businesses needing to know what the limitations are. This also expands out even into schools. I don't know if any of you are involved with boards of trustees. Not Red Beach, Rewa College had an unfortunate incident a couple of years ago. They had a fatal accident on their site. They were taken to court and prosecuted because they were the principal in charge of a place of work when an individual, a contractor, was killed on their site. And they were advised by their solicitors to actually plead guilty, because to have a dead body on your site, you could not have been taking all practicable steps as far as they were concerned. The school was trying to use the defence, well, we brought in the expert. What they should have been doing, apart from bringing the expert in, is saying to the expert, okay, fine, tell us what you're going to do, tell us how you're going to do it. So the school can have some reassurance up front, or an employer can have some reassurance up front from any contractor that these people have actually thought about safety and have built it into their work method. If it's a job that's going to take a period of time, as a business owner or manager, you should actually go out and see what your contractor's doing occasionally and check it against what they said they were going to do. If you had a group in that were going to clean windows in a high-rise building and we're going to work from what they call a BMU, one of those floating scaffolds that gets lowered up and down the building, but you turn up and they've actually got an abseiler up there, you want to know why. Partly it's in your interest to know on a cost basis, because the abseiler is a lot cheaper to work with than the BMU, and you're paying for something you haven't got. But if it goes wrong and you haven't done those base things, you will be in the dock and you will end up with a fine. This is actually the last slide, and what it says on here as well is that a lot of this is all about education, making sure the worker knows what he's doing, making sure the bosses know what they're doing when it comes to safety. And that very bottom line on there, training does cost, and it definitely does. But in the health and safety, if it doesn't go wrong, ignorance will cost you a lot more. A very quick wind up on a court case, no sorry, not a court case, just an accident that happened some years ago that I was involved in investigating. A guy was doing a spray coat on a wall and his paint gun started spluttering. Not being the sharpest guy in the toolbox, he decided to clean it by rubbing his finger over the nozzle. Blew a hole in his finger. This is 8:30 in the morning. He washed it and he put a little dressing on it. So I allowed $5.50 for a dressing, just as a figure to start from. Later on that afternoon, on his way home, he stopped at his GP because his finger was now really beginning to throb. The GP took the dressing off, took one look at it, put him in a car and drove him himself to Middlemore Hospital. Weird thing is, Middlemore Hospital is where he'd been working. They were doing the kindergarten in there at the time. So in A&E, they opened up the finger. They were able to clean out these two segments, but this one, he was warned, was already dead. And unless they amputated the top that night, by the morning his finger would be dead, possibly his hand, and if they didn't start reaction after that, the septicemia would have been going through the body and could have killed him. So he said, take the fingertip. That's instantly an amputation, which makes it a Department of Labour notifiable injury. That means you've got to do a lot more investigating, a lot more report writing. So there's all the time that gets added up for that. Back on site, the guys were all talking about it the following day. Did you hear about Bill last night? Bill wasn't his real name, but never mind. Oh yeah, I heard he lost his finger. I know, it was his arm. I heard he was dying. That's what people are like in the workplace. So there was a lot of downtime there. He was off work for a while, so there was overtime being worked and paid for by the other guys. He then decided he wasn't going to come back to work. He resigned. That company actually uses an employment agency. So there was all the agency fees went into it. That $5.50 bandage honestly came out at $16,000 and $5.50 when you added that lot up. That company was running at an 8% margin, so the revenue they needed to stand still was over $200,000. Now, a lot of SMEs don't turn over $200,000 a year. It's enough to bankrupt a company. So, a bit of training is not a bad option. There are all sorts of training providers out there. Yes, I'm here today, I do run my own training as well, but there are plenty of other providers out there as well, and one of the things I will never do is say, come to me, I'm the best. I know I'm the best, but you need to find that out for yourselves. So please talk to the other companies. If you want names of other companies, see me afterwards, I'll give you names, because I know where I am and I know what I can do. I've jokingly put some adverts out recently. Anyone from the UK at all in the room? Or been over there for a decent OE? Carlsberg over there, one of the big beers, had this lovely advert where they said probably the best beer in the world, probably the longest bar in the world, and so on. Well, I've been advertising recently as probably the best safety consultancy and trainers in New Zealand at least. I have a laugh and a joke with these things, but this is something I take very seriously. I'm very passionate about health and safety. I'm more than happy to take any questions from the floor. We've had one already. Hopefully there'll be a few more. This is only the tip of the iceberg of what's potentially coming out there, though. And so much of it is going to actually, like I say, it will end up coming down to training and making people aware of what is needed to make sure that our workforces stay safe, that they go home every night tired but intact. So they can go home tired and they've earned a few dollars. It means they're back tomorrow, next week, next month. And we're protecting our biggest assets, our people and ourselves. So I thank you for your time and welcome questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
With regard to the ACC givers,
Yes.
currently they've got the experience rating that's happening with companies. So you're saying that the new legislation is looking at those levies going from 10 to 20% up to 50% either way.
They've already started doing it. They've already started doing that. They've been doing that for a while.
What turnover that's at? Because I understand experience ratings are, but it's usually the bigger companies that get hit, or is it the smaller companies?
In theory,
Yeah.
it is everyone across the board the way they're trying, or the way they've been trying to do it. What they've actually taken on though is an absolute mountain of work. So I don't know how far they've got with trying to do it. They're probably starting with the larger companies as they try and cascade it down. I don't honestly even know if you can apply to them to say, look, my ratings have been really good.
Yeah.
I'd like to get some discount.
Yeah, I think you can.
Yeah, you can certainly apply it and get a 10% discount straight away, but that other more experienced rating where you can get the loading or the discount of 50%, I think you'd actually need to go to them directly and actually ask, if you've got a good record, can I get on that now?
Yeah.
They'll probably still turn around and say no, because they probably want a few more to load up so they can afford to actually pay a few out.
It's measured over a 3-year period, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the other things ACC has done of late, for those who have been involved with the WSMP program, a couple of years ago, you were allowed to pick an auditor to come in and do your audit from a panel of people. Now they've shied away from that to some extent, and if you wanted the free audit, you now have to use an internal ACC auditor. You can still use an external auditor, but you now have to pay for them. Now I sat through an audit recently with an ACC auditor, and he was the hardest auditor that I've ever come across. It didn't help, he didn't understand the business environment he was in, and that client went from tertiary down to primary. ACC, as you know from other areas as well, have been trying to save money for quite a while, so that medical issues, if they can palm off an accident to that's happened at home or in a sports area, they will gladly do that. You can argue and try and get back on it. I mean, I've been there myself. I popped meniscus in my right knee at a rugby game. I wasn't playing. I was actually jogging out with a first aid kit to someone who needed treating, and my knee went. And they turned around and said, no, that's not an accident. That's fair wear and tear because of your age. So these things do happen. We're just doing a bit of Q&A, so...
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for the video. Sorry.
That's right. Yeah. No, so there's all sorts of things going on in that field, and it's going to constantly develop and evolve, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I subcontract to ACC and I work specifically with centric services as well, and they're ACC coordinate work specifically with larger companies that can register with them, and particularly for non-work injuries. So it can really, I help support people with non-work injuries and employees as well that really are looking at keeping the health and safety record up as well, and retaining employees.
Yeah, I mean, moving away from this a little bit, one of the things that will still go on through all of this, and the changes as to may or may not happen, is return to work policies and procedures for people. In particular, if you've got someone who's got a bad back, the sooner we can get them back into the workplace, the better for them. Laying around on a couch all day is actually worse for your back than actually being up and mobile. You need to keep that movement up. So, that side of things will happen, and companies like that are key in helping people manage that side of their safety. There's one very large company out there that I know that hides their lost time injuries. I had one guy on a joint venture I was involved in, had a back injury. They sent someone to pick him up each day for 3 days. He'd been signed off for 10. They'd hired a lazy boy, put him in the lazy boy, let him watch a video for half an hour, then drove him home. Then on the 3rd day, they gave him 7 more videos to watch at home. Not once did they question him to see if he'd actually watched them or learnt anything. Just so they didn't have to have an LTI. Same company had a guy with a broken leg. Couldn't work for quite an extended period of time. Because the general manager there got a bonus for lack of LTIs, he had the guy put on extended paid leave. And when you're tendering against companies like that, it's not a fair field out there. And again, a lot of this drive is going to help try and identify this, because the information we have out there is very, very weak and very, very corrupt in places. And they want to actually push things to get it a lot smarter as to the information that is gathered in, and how then we can use that effectively and honestly to benchmark New Zealand, companies against each other and against different industries within New Zealand, but also to start benchmarking New Zealand properly against the rest of the developed world. At the moment, the only rates we've really got are the fatal rates, because that's one we can't really hide. But we don't actually have proper reporting in New Zealand for health injuries. And we have about 800 a month, is it?
It's pretty high.
Yeah. And that includes things like asbestosis that goes on to kill. But because generally with asbestosis we end up expiring due to lung failure or heart attack, pneumonia, etc., they get written up as the medical illness that actually killed, not what caused it. So we're a long, long way behind the 8 ball on this one. We've got a lot of work to do to try and get us where we need to be. Right, any other questions? Okay. Well, I'm out there on stand 13, and it's only unlucky for some. I picked the stand deliberately. I love number 13. If you have any questions, please come and see us there as well. One other parting gift, and it is a gift that I'll give you all. You have my phone number, it's 0800 OSHMAN, it's a free number. At any time you can ring, and if I can deal with your queries over the phone, I don't charge. It's one of my ways of helping to try and give back to promote safety. Because to say it's a passion with me. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, contact details were going to come up, but I never bothered putting the slide up. Thank you.